Hi buys. I wanted to welcome you to HiFi Chats number 7. Appropriately, we have Richard Vandersteen on the 7 here. Hey, Richard, how are you?
Hey, Alan, good to be with you.
Well, thank you. I love the aquarium in the background. It's awesome.
Yeah, well, music and fish, better than Valium. Does better.
Awesome. Well, let me do a little housekeeping here. Listen, for you folks out there, thank you so much for joining us. Again, this is HiFi Chats number 7. Last week we had Ken Forsyth with MQA, and next week we're going to have kind of an interesting guest, Lee Scoggins, who is president of Next Screen. Those are the guys that own HiFi Plus and also the Absolute Sound. So I'm really looking forward to that as well. Lee lives in Atlanta, so it's kind of a nice deal for us to be able to do together. Also, I wanted to ask you, if you will, if you want to keep abreast of what we do a lot of events. We are doing these HiFi Chats every Friday at 2 o'clock. So if you go to hifibuys.com and subscribe to the newsletter there, that'll tell you not just when we're doing HiFi Chats, but also the other things that are happening at the store. Also, there will be some playlists coming up in the chats that you can link to. These are the things about all the people in the industry that we've had on HiFi Chats, and they have done the music they've talked about, and we'll be adding Richard's stuff to it as well. I also ask you to like and subscribe to the channel there, and appreciate that very much. I also want to thank all the frontline folks out there that are doing all the hard work for us. We appreciate y'all so much. And anyway, if there's anything we can do, please reach out. We would love to help in some way that you might see necessary. So also, I wanted to let y'all know a couple of news on HiFi Buys. We are actually officially opening on Monday. We're going to be open Monday through Saturday from 11 to 4. That's starting this Monday. We'll be on the phones from 9 in the morning till about 7 in the evening. So we will be very accessible and can make appointments outside of the 11 to 4 area. Also wanted to let y'all know that probably my first announcement of this, but we have worked really hard over the last couple of months in trying to get an e-commerce section of our website together. We're going to start off kind of slowly with it and then build it appropriately. And but anyway, we're really looking forward to that. It's kind of another way for us to have a door into the business. So I have bored you yet, Richard? My apologies.
No, sir.
All right. Well, let's get into it. You ready?
You betcha.
All right, very good. This is Richard Vandersteen, president of Vandersteen Audio. I've been a dealer for him for a long time. We have enjoyed many moments together here at the store, and also added his house in California. Actually went out one time and kind of used his house as home base. He was kind enough to offer it. And I visited about 5 national parks and just had one wonderful time out there. So Richard, tell us a little bit of, in getting to know you, tell us about your family, please.
Well, my parents immigrated from the Netherlands after World War II. And at that time, you had to have sponsors. So when people immigrated from Europe, they tended to go into areas of this country where there were other Dutch people. And this is an agriculture area. And so it was dairymen and farmers that came here. And my father and mother, they needed a sponsor because those people were required to take care. There was no social net, so to speak. And so there happens to be an enclave of a lot of Dutch people in this area, mostly in the farming community. And went to school here, lived here all my life, except for 4 years in the Air Force.
And where is here? Tell our guest.
Hanford, California, which if you were to draw a line from San Francisco to LA and bisect it, you'd be very close to Hanford. It's 90 miles inland as the crow flies from the coast in the San Joaquin Valley. 25% of the food and fiber produced in the United States is produced in this valley from Bakersfield up to Redding.
It is amazing to me when I was out there just driving around how much of that there is. And it was, being from here, we see different things, but and certainly not the quantity. That was impressive.
Yeah, and it makes we get a lot of fresh produce and fruit, whatever. It's that's a good thing about living here.
So do you just stop at the side of the road and go pick your own, or?
You can. The farmers are they let you go back in and fields and glean.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So tell us a little bit about hobbies that you've had throughout your life and currently.
Oh my goodness.
I know. I know.
It's pretty much anything with a motor in it. I mean, back in the early 70s, Ford came out with a car called Quinto, and I was always messing with cars, building tube amps, building speakers, and playing. And the folks, Dad always supplemented his income by having a chicken ranch because he had myself and my 4 sisters. That was basically free labor. So we always had a full-time job, and we took care of the chickens, and he supplemented his income with that. But there were machines there. We made our own automatic feeders and things like that. And Dad was not mechanically inclined. I filled in that part, but he knew what needed to be done. So, yeah, built my own airplane, been into boats. We built this home that we're in. I built my factory. It's made my own robotic equipment to build loudspeakers. So it's all, anything outside of the box I enjoy. I don't really like wasting my time doing something other people have done.
I think that has been shown.
Yeah.
I know that I went on a trip with you one time and you had your motorhome, and you were talking about all the things you were going to do to it. And then about a year later, the entire suspension and everything underneath it was all redone and that kind of thing as well. And I know you and Enika really enjoyed times in that.
Yeah, well, we were on a tour bus, and Enika says to me, he said, why doesn't our motorhome ride like this tour bus? And I, that's a good question. And basically, motorhomes are built on a truck frame, and they ride like a truck. And so when they stopped for a bathroom break, I crawled underneath the thing, and I noticed that there was a ZF front independent suspension under that bus. Went home, Googled it, and found one in a wrecking yard in Michigan. And anyway, it was a long project. Raised the thing about 6 feet up in the air in the factory, and tore out what was there out of there, and put that ZF front end under it. So I now have an independent front suspension on a motorhome. It's not a truck frame anymore.
You're always amazing that way. All right, so tell us a little bit about life experiences, things that have had an impact on who you are.
Well, that would, I guess, would have to be the influence of, there was always a lot of work to do at home, and very little time. We didn't have a television set until I was 16 years old, and the only reason we got one then was my uncle had given Dad and Mom a TV. So, but there was always plenty to do, no time for that anyway, and just found that I always felt better when I was busy from. And didn't like school, did terrible in school, mostly because I was always ditching school in order to work. And went off to the Air Force. I was the first, my age was the first group that went to the lottery system in place of the draft, and was number 7. Speaking of number 7,
wow.
My birth date was number 7th in the lottery. So that was in the middle of the Vietnam era. And so I decided that I didn't want to go into the Army, and basically went into the Air Force instead, although they were all full up. And I said, well, let me take the test anyway. And because I had experience in electronics and mechanical, it's a very simple test. But I had a little bit of knowledge in everything, which is basically what that test, aced the test, because they told me there was no room. They were full up. And when that happened, they basically said, well, we'll probably find a place for you. But, and ended up going in the Air Force, off into tech school in electronics. Very much enjoyed that, was ready to get out of that, and then came back into this area and went into construction, and then started Vandersteen Audio.
Awesome. One of the most famous pictures of you is with you in a Pinto.
Yeah.
As you described earlier. Tell us about that picture.
Well, that was back in the days. I was delivering a pair of speakers to a store. There was a high-end store that started in Visalia, about 30 miles away. And I was building speakers in the garage for them. And I was delivering a pair that day. But that Pinto, back then, it wasn't common to turbocharge things, but I turbocharged everything. So that car was very fast. It would outrun a modern day Corvette in those days with a little 2-liter 4-cylinder engine. So yeah, it was
a true sleeper.
It was one of my it was one of my projects.
Oh my gosh. So I believe there was something about you and your dad's lawnmower or something like that.
Oh, really? The family, we didn't have a lot of money, and I had converted a bicycle into a motorbike. The only problem is the only motor we had was the lawnmower.
And how old were you when this happened?
What's that?
How old were you when you did this?
7 or 8, something like that. It was when we first met. Yeah, about 8. And the only engine we had was on the mower, so I had to take it off, put it on the bike, hook it all up, and they were building the 198 freeway through Hanford at that time back then, and that was already paved but still closed. And got stopped out there by a highway patrol for being on his motorbike on this closed freeway. There's a lot of room. It didn't have any brakes, so I needed time to stop, and did put brakes on it later on. And then when I'd get back, I'd have to put the motor back on the lawnmower so I could mow the lawn on Saturday.
I just love that story. Anyway, it came up for many years ago. I was thinking about it this morning. Also, you have a little career in racing. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I owned and drove a super modified for 25 years. And basically, it was a lot of fun. And one thing about racing, if you're really, really into it, is you can run 5th, 6th, last. It doesn't matter. It's fun when you're out there and you do the best you can. But your fans, mostly my kids and wife, they're more interested in you winning. So in 96, I decided, okay. But what I was doing is I was running this program on my earnings. I wasn't putting any money in it. The only sponsor we had was Vandersteen Audio. So Vandersteen Audio would get us in and pay the entrance fee and the pit passes and all that. But the actual car and whatever we did to the car, I only used winnings to do that. And that meant you were going to run 5th and 6th every season, and we did. And then in 96, I decided, well, I'll throw a little money at this. But like in audio, to do a little better cost a lot of money. And I did become track champion that year. And that's the year I should have retired because it was downhill from there.
Because that was a California award, correct? Statewide?
Would have been on the West Coast. One of the best dirt tracks in the California, on the West Coast here, happens to be right here in Hanford. It's a 3rd-mile clay track. That's pretty much all dirt track stuff. And it was a lot of fun.
I bet. I understand you've even said somewhat recently go out to the sand dunes with your kids and that kind of thing and get on the dune buggies.
Oh yeah, we still have to. I built two dune buggies, and we take the grandkids out to Dumont up there by Death Valley, and of course that's a wintertime thing. Or we can go over to the coast, but there's nothing really challenging to climb there. But last year managed to roll the thing with my grandson in it, and after the night before, telling a gal, says, look, in 40 years, I've never seen one of these things roll. You really don't need to be afraid. And the very next morning, I go out and roll it twice with my grandkid in there. I'd made a suspension change. It didn't work out too well.
Well, everybody is okay, I know. So that's
oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, listen, thanks for sharing that. So guys out there, if you're a gearhead, he's your guy. All right. So tell us how you got into this business.
Well, in high school, I worked for a guy that owned a tire shop. His name was Reg. And he was a real serious audiophile, and I didn't know anything about the audiophile world. I went off to the Air Force, came back from the Air Force, and he knew that I was technically inclined, and he was having a problem with his speakers. I don't even remember what they were. Real expensive, though. and he was having a problem with them. And he called me up and he said, Rich, can you have a look at these things and see if you can figure out what's wrong with them? And I took them apart and I was just amazed. It was basically TV replacement drivers with a whole lot of polyvinyl acetate painted on them, basically white glue, layers and layers of it on the drivers and everything. And they did sound pretty good, but I just thought, wow, for that kind of money, people deserve better parts than this and better technology. And that it kind of grew out of that. And he was real serious. He had his living room. Back then, he was running a Lynn Sondak, and he was on a rare around here, but a home with a wood floor, and kept getting feedback problems. And that's when it first came up with the whole tiptoe idea to try to isolate that turntable. And eventually what we did is cut a hole in the floor and poured a concrete pier all the way down to the ground below. Came right up through the floor and built this big concrete pedestal to set his turntable up on. But anyway, we did a lot of the early R&D and listening right over here on still right here in Hanford on Grangeville Boulevard. He doesn't live there anymore, but I often wonder what those people did with that big concrete pier coming up through their floor.
Nothing like over engineering something, right?
Exactly. And my dad was in the concrete business, so
that made it very easy. Good for you. So all of these hi-fi chats have always kind of involved kind of these moments when somebody went wow about the music. Can you tell us about your kind of the first time you kind of went wow?
Well, music, Dad was a tenor, and we didn't have a TV set, but there was always a stereo. Dad had one of these consoles where it had two turntables. One, you could actually cut your own lacquer. You talk into this microphone and make your own record, and then they would send that back to the rest of the family that was still in the Netherlands. And that's how they would let grandpa and grandma hear, oma and opa, we call it in Dutch, hear their grandkids and speak to their parents. And anyway, I ended up putting better amplifier in it, better speakers, and on and on. But
of course,
so music was always a big thing. I don't know if there was that one moment. I guess it would be involved with Reg and just really getting into it and understanding how people got into it and how people deserve better parts, better engineering than what was in this. At that time, highly esteemed product. I wish I could remember what it was.
Wow.
But sounded pretty good, just wasn't very well made.
Okay. So Richard's going to fix it.
No, I didn't fix those. I decided to make my own.
All right. So tell us about a particular piece of music that moves you and why, and how did you find it?
Probably on a pair of quad 57s, Joan arbitrating. She had a record that had a bass singing with her, a duet, and can't remember what it was called, but it just gave me goosebumps. I was so emotionally involved in the emotion in that recording, and ever since then, it's that goosebump factor that can happen when a system is right and when the music is right and the mood is right. Until MQA never would happen for me on digital. It was always an analog thing because I think it has to do with realistic timing and so forth. Mm-hmm. And that's always been the goal of what I've done. That's been the gold standard and trying to get there. Nothing's perfect, but that's been the goal.
Yeah, they say it's really, really difficult to create the dynamics of real life. That's, because it's at another place. When you hang out around a jet engine or something outside, go to a drag strip, see those things. It's pretty amazing.
It's not the sheer volume as much as it is the dynamic contrast. the difference between the loud and the quiet. Part of that has a lot to do with the background noise, with the signal to noise ratio. And it's very difficult to get that dynamic contrast without popping your eardrums. It's just
that's one of the things we're going to get into here in a little bit, because it's come up more and more. And as you know, the last 2-3 years of my life, I have paid attention to noise kind of all the way through. And what I'm realized is all this gear and all our systems, whether it be acoustically or electronically, or because of crossovers or drivers or whatever, just noise is prevalent. And we cannot have great fidelity with all that noise in it. It just can't happen.
Yeah, if you remember way back when at seminars like I've done for you and your stores over the years and others, the old people would say a lot of times, man, I need a good power line conditioner because my system sounds so much better at night than it does in the daytime. And the power is about the same at night as it is in the daytime, but the ambient noise in one's home in the evening is at least 15 to 20 dB better than it is during the day, with cars and traffic and refrigerators running, air conditioning. And there's a good way of knowing what the impact of noise can be. The difference between day and night is nothing other than the signal to noise is improved by that much. Well, as we'll get into later, I guess what you're saying here is, that's involving lots of things, not only your power, but your rack. HRS has been dealing with noise in the rack, and AudioQuest with their power line conditioners and power cords, and anyway, it goes on.
Well, we'll get there. That's the one thing that I found is, basically through HRS and some of the AQ stuff and also, your speakers, we found that we just, you can make something that's so relaxing, and your brain just simply relaxes when you get in a noise-free environment. So, but
I hope you bring that up again later, because I think there's a very good, very, very, very good explanation for that we ought to get into a little bit.
Okay. I think we'll have time to get there. So one other thing, you were talking about goosebumps, and what's funny is I think about those goosebump moments that I've had, and when I go back and rethink about them, I get goosebumps on my arms again.
Exactly.
And it's weird because the memories of these things have come up for people through all these HiFi chats as well. And so it is funny how you can have a memory of a recording and get those same chill bumps without the recording playing. It's like, anyway, I just think it's really, really cool. So
it is. It's a physical way of knowing you're emotionally connected, which is kind of a buzz.
Well, I'm glad I have that ability.
Exactly.
Yes. So who is or are your mentors in business or life?
Oh, that would hands down have to be my father. Dad, he started with this, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. It's, he had a very, very strong work ethic. From very young on, he says, Richard, just because everybody's jumping off the end of a bridge doesn't mean you need to. Be an individual, be yourself.
I would say Inaka would probably agree that you've done that.
Yeah, she he was again, not a mechanical guy, but his thoughts were out of the box a lot. And there's nothing new under the sun, really. It's just how you arrange it.
That's a great way of putting it.
Experience, Anyway, so yeah, that would be my dad easily.
Awesome. Tell us about your path to starting Vandersteen Audio. You already kind of touched on it a little bit, but when did it kind of just go off in your brain? Because I know you were helping this other gentleman with trying to improve his speakers and that kind of thing. And when did it kind of go, gee, I ought to be in the speaker business? What was that moment?
I was building my own for the fun of it, and my construction company had failed because of a recession. So I was driving truck at the time for a refinery, hauling jet fuel and things like that. And on the radio, there was an ad of some young guys that had opened a high-end audio store in Visalia. And one Saturday, I went by there and saw what they had, didn't know anything about what was going on, hadn't heard of any of those brands. And I says, I was every retailer's nightmare. Some punk kid come in there with his little red Pinto and says, I make my own speakers. I think they're pretty good. And would you like to hear them? And they humored me. They said, yeah, bring them by. And a week or two later, I brought them by, and they went, this shows some, this is really kind of weird stuff, and then we went through a year's worth of live versus recordings and pounding on, just perfecting it and everything. And in the end, it was their suggestion that we take it to the show, CES show in Chicago in 1977, and rented a van, and we drove out there and came out of there with a lot of dealers and orders, and that was it.
Wow. What a great story.
The first speakers we made were more disco oriented. They had a lot of woofers and several mid ranges, and I think 4 tweeters or whatever in them, and they would just play blood curdling loud. And it's and I was having fun building them and delivering them and everything. And then pretty much had decided, my young wife at the time, when we were starting to have a family, I said, I think I'd like to make a living this way. And they were going to do the marketing, and they had a discussion whether we ought to do East Coast sound or West Coast sound. And I remember driving home that 30 miles being so discouraged, because here I'd made that decision, and my marketing people are talking about what the speakers ought to sound like. And there seemed to be a lot of indecision there. And so that we met on Thursdays. So in that week, the next Thursday, I said, I've got an idea. I says, why don't we try to make a speaker that doesn't have an East Coast sound or a West Coast sound, that tries to replicate as best we can the sound that's coming from the amplifier? And they thought that was a good idea. And that's when we started doing all the listening tests, and we made our own recordings and did all these live versus things. And the first thing that happened, and multiple woofers were no problem, but then we're down to one mid-range and one, then we ended up with first order filters. And the next thing you knew, all the drivers were on a pole. And that's how the old original Model 2 happened. That came out of all of that. And it was that speaker that we took to the show in June in Chicago, 1977. Wow.
We've got a special announcement about that too. We're going to get to here in a little bit, and kind of excited to be able to talk about that. What are the main reasons that Vandersteen Audio is who they are, not what they are?
What content? I mean, I guess who they are is I've always done what I need, and in reality, what that means is you put it into the market like we did with the help of the original guys that were doing the marketing. And you hope enough people agree to keep you in business, to have a growing business. It just so happened it was the right product at the right time at the right price, and it went crazy. Sold thousands and thousands and thousands of those, just unheard of. Had 120 dealers. Dealers would have weekends where they'd knock out 12 pair on a Saturday. It was crazy. And that'd be the early 80s up through the mid 90s. Just very fortunate to have had that product, and it basically built our business, built our factory. So I guess it wasn't really my plan. It just happened. My dad never believed in work, though. He says, luck. I mean, he never believed in luck. He says, luck is usually pretty much directly proportionate to the amount of work and how stubborn you are, how persistent you are. A lot of work and persistence, and then you end up getting lucky.
And also with vision. I think being able to look forward. I think has, you know, a play in there as well. So,
Yeah.
and obviously you've been very strict in the way that you know, believe that a speaker should be built. And you've pretty much stayed with that throughout, and technology has come forward to allow you to advance that whole theory and thought. So,
Yeah, it's like I said, it has to work for me, and uh, that's why they are the way they are.
all right. So before we get into the history of Vandersteen Audio, and we're going to do that in just a second, I wanted to ask everybody to like and subscribe out there. And again, appreciate you joining us today. Also, you're able to ask questions in the chat there. You'll see it on the screen. We'll also be putting out some links to playlist of all the songs or music that are mentioned during these HiFi chats with all the folks in the industry. Also, we'd ask you to go to hifibuys.com and subscribe to the newsletter. That'll let you know what we have coming up, what we're doing, and that kind of thing. We've got a new website that got out there in December, and also have a e-commerce portion of that that'll be opening up in the next couple of weeks. One of the things that, you know, I think is so important is, you know, all these companies have history, and it's trying to figure out a little bit about the history of Vandersteen. We already have heard a bit of that, but can you give us kind of a brief, kind of as you've seen things go through the years, or what you think is important for our guest?
Well, we just basically took those original design principles that came out of the original Model 2 and applied material improvements and advancements in materials and techniques and everything. But basically, the basic design never changed. Everything we make to do, the Model 7s, the new Quintos, is still based on all of those basic building blocks that we discovered through all of that year's worth of evaluation, live versus recordings and everything. And basically, beyond that point, audiophiles like to as they get into it, they want to push the envelope in their own systems to higher degrees. So we just kept putting more and more in there, better and better materials to improve every aspect of the loudspeaker as time or finances would allow. And it's been very successful. I never really had the need myself for a different kind of speaker that would do different things, because that didn't work for me. So we never did that. They were all based on the same stuff.
Okay. I understand you were one of the first guys to use one of the analyzers out there, the FET. Is that?
Yeah, back then it was, that was the Genrad 2512. That thing was almost $30,000, and that's in late 70s money. But it was a fast Fourier transform box with 100K bandwidth, and gave you the ability to see the phase on things, whether these drivers really were adding up the way you thought they did. I've never really cared about what a crossover did, or I mean, I cared, of course, but what was always more important, same with the drivers, the combination of the crossover, the driver. We manipulated those by having good test equipment, including our listening tests, to give us what we wanted at the listening position in the room. And man, we had deals where we would use scanning. We would use, you would take two microphones and you would sum them together, and you would scan them across the cone while doing different sweep frequencies. And if the VU on them, if the dB output went up, that meant the cones were adding at that point. If the measurement, if the SPL with the drive signal being the same, if the SPL meter went down, it's, oh, you know, there one part of the cone is canceling what another part of the cone is. So nowadays we have that German company called Quinto, where we can get a model and a map of what's really going on. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, that had to all be done by ear. It wasn't easy. The 2512 made that a lot easier to see what our ears were telling us.
Well, it's kind of interesting. I guess that's called a laser infrared machine.
The new machine, the Kippel machine in Germany. Yeah, it's a very expensive thing, and it's not really worth purchasing because it's about 80 grand. And, once you develop a product and know what your science is, and they'll measure anything you send them for $400 and you get the full result. So it's not worth investing in and ScanSpeak and most of the major vendors that we use have one in-house now. They didn't 10, 15 years ago, but now they do.
So just to touch on your drivers that you do, for the most part, you use ScanSpeak and you kind of design the driver and send them the baskets or that kind of thing. How does that work?
ScanSpeak and CS for the most part. We make the cones or we make the domes, like our carbon fiber things. We build those actually in-house. Early on, we had a patent about the reflection-free zone behind the mid-range. No one had a basket like that. And so we tooled up our own and then provided that, in that case, originally to VIFA and then later on to ScanSpeak. And then I didn't really want to buy a magnetizer. I didn't really want to get into building the drivers. So I only made my own components that were really unique that they couldn't supply from one of their vendors and had them assemble them for me.
And yet at the same time, you advanced them. That's
well, yeah, that original patent ended up affecting the way a lot of drivers are made. Today, now that patent's run out about 5 years ago, you see a whole lot more attention applied to what's going on behind a driver, how the magnet structure in the basket and everything is a lot more open and less reflective. It didn't exist before we got the patent on it, so I have to believe that had an influence.
I was going to ask you, the next question was, how have the products evolved as the world's evolved? But I think that's already a little bit been explained, and we'll get into that further as we get down the road. So I'm going to move on. And so this thing, noise, what is noise and how do your speakers reduce it? And what does that do for what we hear? And I realize that's a very large.
Yeah, noise is a way of qualifying anything that isn't part of the actual signal you're trying to reproduce. So obviously noise can be in your power, noise can be in your rack system that's holding the gear. It's well known that cabinets can make noise. We want the cabinets of loudspeakers to be inert because all the sound is supposed to come from the drivers, but that's not universal. There are speakers made where the designers believe the cabinet is supposed to contribute, like the body on a guitar would, or the difference about the way a Stradivarius is made. But a loudspeaker is supposed to be a transducer with as little of its own character as possible. That's my view. So that means you want the box silent. And we've done now since for 25 years, this box in a box. But even back in the old 2 days, if you assume that everything resonates, we made all of those weird shaped little parts out of 3 or 4 different thicknesses of materials just to make sure that not any one of those resonances added up to be enough to bother our ears, to stick up so that the signal noise ratio would be preserved.
So what you're saying,
if the cabinet's silent, then that's not a factor anymore. And then but there's also noise in filters. High order filters ring. And that ringing that you get out of that filter, no matter how you make them, is a form of noise. It wasn't part of the original signal. And then I started attacking the noise that's within the diaphragm itself of our tweeters and our mid-range and woofer cones. And that's what led to the carbon fiber balsa cones that are in several of our products now. Mm-hmm. So noise comes in a lot of forms. Noise can also be putting in triple pane windows so you get less noise from outside of your home into your listening room.
Getting the decay of a sound down.
Some of the things that we did when we designed your sound room there at the store, that was about isolating noise of the room. Mm-hmm. So anytime we can lower the noise floor, the music is going to stand out more clearly and be more emotionally engaging. Not any one of those parameters is more important than others. They all need to be dealt with. It would be a mistake to throw a heroic amount of money at, let's say, the cabinet and ignore the noise in other parts of the loudspeaker. You want to universally bring these things up to where they're in balance with one another.
One of the most important things I ever heard from you, we were talking about a pair of twos, and this was probably 10 plus years ago. And it was basically about, Alan, this is not a top of the line, absolutely to the end of the world kind of speaker. What we want this speaker to do is to do nothing wrong. And it was a very interesting statement to me, because it was like, wow, you can listen to the speaker and everything's kind of in balance with everything else, and yet the things sell for $2,000 something. And so by not having anything kind of stand out and having it all averaged across, the speaker just doesn't do anything wrong. And so it took me about almost 2 years to absorb that thought and to kind of really grasp what that meant. So anyway, I appreciate that from you.
Yeah, and it can be very humbling for a designer, because you find an obvious improvement in a tweeter. And you get so excited about that improvement that you've made because you know it's better. So you stick it in a Model 2. And because it's now so far advanced to the rest of the speaker, the overall end result is not good. It ends up being the old sore thumb. And that forces you to bring the whole rest of the speaker up to that level. And that's why you see all these different versions of the Model 2s. Some of them started out with an improvement in the tweeter. Some of them started out with an improvement in the woofer. But none of them ever went to the marketplace with only that improvement, because everything else around it had to be lifted up along with it.
Yep. I think
it ends up spotlighting itself, which can get people's attention. It's kind of like turning the contrast all the way up on the TV sets at Best Buys. It can get your attention. It calls attention to itself and say, hey, pretty me. But it doesn't wear well over time. You might buy with it till the check clears, but sooner or later, you're not going to like it. It's not going to be emotionally engaging, because it was a too strong a character in its own right.
Yep. Absolutely awesome. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what is a first order network and why do you use them?
First orders networks are difficult to do because it's very demanding on the drivers. Everything you read about the negative of first order filters, where they say power handling and limitations here and there, they are true. And that's why you can't make a $20,000 two-way, because you need to have it be at least a three-way, so each one of those drivers has a smaller part of the spectrum to work on, so that these negatives about using first order filters are no longer a factor, because they're only true if you compare two ways to two ways. But if for the same money you can use a first order filter, make it time and phase correct, but you do it with three drivers instead of two, you're going to be able to have the advantage, because the only thing that's time and phase correct and transient perfect is a first order filter. Plus, you have that extra ringing that comes from those extra poles. So we are trying to preserve the waveform as an instrument pressurizes the air and the microphone captures it. We want to reproduce that back into the living room, back into your sound room, and impinge on your eardrums that same phase relationship for all the harmonics. Because a bass transient, for instance, involves the woofer, obviously, but its leading edge is actually in the mid-range and also the tweeter. So all of those need to be in sync to give you that steep rising edge that makes that rim shot sound real, like it could have been in your room. Yep. And it has nothing to do with loudness then. It has to do with timing integrity.
Well, I think I read a book one time, This Is Your Brain on Music, and it was really interesting. And it talked about overtones and all that kind of thing, and how basically every driver plays every note. So whether it's a cymbal or whether it's a bass guitar, every driver in that speaker is actually making a sound. And
that's absolutely true by my experience.
Yep. So that was an interesting book. If any of y'all want to pick one up, I'd highly recommend it. It gets a little deep in places, but a lot of it's just kind of like wow little moments that you have in kind of understanding how music is and how your brain understands it. So So your speakers use exclusively first order networks?
All of them, yes.
Okay. So
now, let me go back to that 1 second. When you look at the network itself, it may be more complex than what a typical first order would be. But we want the transfer function. We want the network and the driver that it's controlling to give us that first order function acoustically at the listening position. So they are usually more involved than one coil on a woofer, a cap and a mid-range on a cap and a coil on a mid-range, and just a cap on the tweeter. In order to accomplish first order transfer function at the listening position, they're always more complex than that.
You know, I've always, you know, as you know, I carried, what is it, Meadowlark Audio. They were a time and phase coherent speaker, Jim Teal.
Yep.
I have a picture right back here. As a matter of fact, when I was up at his factory, and anyway, I've always admired, because it is extremely difficult to build these things. And if you, those that do have any design experience in speakers and have tried to go there probably realize the kind of work that you have to do.
Well, and you have John Dunleavy, all the Dunleavys, the Spikas, John Bell, Spica. Freed was not.
No.
Dahlquist was not, but they were more so. But they were lower order filters. Dynaudio today is low order filters, but they're not time and phase correct. Just because the drivers are staggered or they say they use first order filters does not mean that they'll do the impulse response. Does not mean that there'll be time and phase correct.
It requires the drivers to be able to stop and start on the same time, and cabinets be positioned in the cabinets correctly, and so on and so forth. There is, it again is, it's one reason I don't do what you do.
Well, the only way to really tell is to look at that impulse response. Does that impulse look like a triangle that's leaning forward? If any part of that impulse goes below, that means those frequencies are out of phase.
And for you folks out there, if you look in a Stereophile magazine, you'll be able to see that impulse response in the test results. You'll see it in the graphs that are put in some of the reviews for speakers. So anyway, if you get an opportunity, take a look at that. So you have a pair of speakers that you started with. You've sold about 1.5 billion pairs of them. I know it's over 100,000. I had that in my jokes here, but so you have just announced a new version of the Model 2, which is called the SIG 3. I understand there's about $100 bump between the older ones and the newer ones. And so how have you changed it, and how is it better? So if you can just kind of give us those changes and then an overall picture of what the twos are.
The biggest change is a new crossover circuit board, upgraded crossover components, and the drivers are all the same, but it's just refining the crossover, applying some of the new materials to that, and also getting those connectors soldered right into the PC board, which eliminates any full range wire in the speaker. As you know, selling wires sound different from one another. And in a loudspeaker, you don't want any full range wire going from a connector to the dividing network, because that changes with time. Once you've designed the network and the driver as a loop, including its interconnecting wire, whatever that might be, that becomes a loop. And that doesn't change because it's all part of a tuned system. The only reason that would change is if you changed all of the driver, the wire, and the crossover elements in that loop to do something different. But full range wire is constantly evolving, as you know, because you sell various wire companies. And I have been working at eliminating any full range wire in any Vandersteen so that our product is not limited by what a good full range wire was at the moment. So this has been applied to the one a long time ago. Now it's applied to the two. And of course, it's in the Trio, the Quattro, the Quinto, and the Model 7s. It was in the old 5s. But it carries that thought process on into the two now.
So tell us just a brief description of the two. It's a two-way, three-way.
Three-way. Actually, it's a four-driver three-way. The 10-inch unit in the rear is driven. We call it an acoustic coupler, but it works in tandem with the 8 in the front. And basically what you have is the 8 in the front goes from DC, well, it doesn't go to DC, but from low frequencies up to the crossover at 900. And then that is augmented by that 10 in the back from its low frequency limit up to about 60 hertz.
Okay.
In the rear of the unit, just to give us more square inches of radiation area, ability to move more air in the deeper frequencies. That then transfers over to there's literally a crossover there, to the 8 in the front, which then goes into a 4.5-inch mid-range, open back mid-range, and our aerodynamic basket, of course, and then to a 1-inch ceramic coated tweeter.
So you can almost kind of call it a 3.5 way.
Yeah, kind of, sort of, but it is, the two drivers are in one volume. So to call it a 4-way would be deceitful.
Yes.
Not accurate. So.
Well, we've seen the kind of with the skinnier column speakers that we see out there a lot. So we see a lot of 2.5-way designs, which are kind of doing similar things, just not with 4 drivers. So,
right.
Yeah, very, very good. The 2s have been out since you put your first pair out there when? 1980? 77. That's right. You said earlier. My apologies. So when you think about that, that's a speaker that is on its 8th iteration. And what do you think are the differences in the sound between the SIG 2 to this newer version of the SIG 3? What do you think someone should hear from it?
Well, it's obvious when you listen to the very first one to what we're making now that they come from the same family. Yes. That what was important then is still important now. But there's not a common part. There's nothing in common with them anymore other than the way they look on the outside. And people are amazed when they hear that direct comparison, how far these advancements with the same exact design parameters have taken the speaker. It really is. It's not day and night. What is day and night? But it's a huge, huge incremental change. But we're also talking about 45 years.
Correct.
Massaging and advancements in materials and, just.
And you've changed.
And make it better.
Technology has come forward.
You got some housekeeping you can do. I need to excuse myself.
Yes, absolutely.
All right.
So, folks, we're going to have Richard back in just a second. I want to ask y'all to like and subscribe there on the screen for you. And if you will, ask questions in the chat. You should see that right in front of you. We will be popping up some links to playlist, which basically are a lot of the music that's been discussed and that kind of thing during these HiFi chats. Also, if you will, please go to hifibuys.com and you can subscribe to the newsletter, which will keep you abreast of everything that we're doing. We're really excited about being able to add an e-commerce portion to our website. And it should be a fun exercise for us. We decided to do this in February. We were going to wait till the end of the year, but with our doors shut for a while, we decided we needed to have a bigger door and also kind of an extension of the store to allow people that want a touchless system to purchase from that they can do so. So, and what we are very excited about too is to be able to have conversations with those people and also be able to make sure, they have access to us so that they can get help before, during, and after the sale. So anyway, thank you very much for doing that. Last week we had Ken Forsyth with MQA. And next week we have Lee Scoggins, who is president of Next Screen, who actually owns HiFi Plus and the Absolute Sound. So that should be an interesting conversation as well. I do want to thank all our frontline workers. You end up finding you guys, it's just amazing. I could not imagine being a nurse or a doctor having to go into a hospital at these times, and some of the some of the wonderful things of saving people, but then also the other side of that as well. It's just, I don't know, it's a little overwhelming for me when I think about that for those folks. So we're going to have Richard back here in just one second. We're getting ready to get into talking about some of his center channels and that kind of thing.
I'm back.
We just covered the Model 2s, and now that we have Richard back, I want to ask you. So I've had this thing where I'm selling Quattro wood CTs, trio CTs, that kind of thing. These are extraordinarily great level speakers, and most definitely within home theater as well. And so you have two center channels now that use the CT. And can you tell us a little bit about what that is? I always get asked, well, it's just a tweeter, but that's not really true, is it?
No, tweeters have always been, you get in trouble when you say the most important driver in the loudspeaker. But when it comes to the pleasure of the experience of listening to music, when you're talking about the emotional engagement that you get out of music, or the realism of effects in a movie, the Foley effects and so forth, it's very, very important. That in many ways is determined by the quality of the tweeter. And over the years, I've done a lot of experimentation with different materials from the different alloys. And then alloys got a really bad reputation because they were nasty in some people's opinions. And many of them were, because they weren't properly designed. That wasn't so much the problem with the material. It was the way they were designed. And then you get into beryllium and you get into diamond. There were some made out of fiberglass. And what you want a tweeter or any diaphragm to be is stiff enough in order to reproduce all of those frequencies in a pistonic way, where it moves in one plane. Every part of that area of that dome or cone is moving in exact unison with the voice coil. That's how you eliminate this noise we were speaking, this obscuration that we were speaking, without having to be artificially bright to give you the illusion that the information is there. We have enough recordings that tend to be on the bright side anyway, and to add that, that's like adding insult to injury or pouring salt in the wound. But we do want all of the information. So it turns out what you need for that is you need a material that's very, very stiff. The problem with very stiff materials is they have a lot of ringing. Once they hit their breakup mode, they turn into a bell. And that beats down. You can, even if that's happening at a very high frequency, it has an effect at the frequencies below. And, or if it's a woofer, the harmonics above. And so what you need is a very stiff material that has good internal damping. You don't want to damp it and kill it, but you do want to control its own resonance. And in the end, it's that resonance where that material breaks up that gives you the sound of that driver. And by a huge margin, I have discovered that carbon fiber made out of uniformia, hand laid up. This isn't your typical woven carbon fiber pressed into a dome. It's hand laid up unifiber. The matrix that holds all those fibers together, which has buckyballs and graphene in mixed with epoxy, basically is what it is. They have fancy names for it, but that's what it is. And its only purpose is to hold all those fibers, because those individual carbon fibers on their own don't have a lot of strength, only in one direction. Something has to hold that all together, and that's usually about 28% by weight of the dome. But if that can also act like the shock absorber on the spring that creates the suspension of your car, and terminate that ringing or dampen that ringing out as quickly as possible, it's going to be easier to listen to. Okay. It's going to give you the information without fatigue. And for long-term listening, ultimately, it doesn't matter if you're doing little short demos, popping around with this part of one CD and then popping on another one, or streaming and listening to half of this song and another. A lot of people are just doing that all the time because they're more testing their equipment or whatever. But if you love music like I do, and you listen to an entire album at one time, eliminating that fatigue is a big part of being able to get emotionally involved. And that's what works for me. And we look for customers that are looking for the same thing, so that you can sell them a pair.
Yep. I had a gentleman come in and put a down payment on a pair of Quintos today. So anyway, I know he's very excited. He's been a Quattro cloth owner for probably 12 years now. And so anyway, it's,
that will be a nearly day and night difference.
Yep. I told him so. So
that will be big.
And he's watching. So
and that does not disparage the old Quattro fabric at all. That's a heck of a loudspeaker, still is.
Yes, it is.
But you throw more money at it, throw more technology at it, and it does get better.
Yes, it does.
Even though it's the same thing. Basically the same thing.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I've been amazed at. So during the last year, you have a new speaker that has come out. We're skipping a few, so let me just kind of fill that in. First of all, he has a Model 1 Vandersteens, Model 2 Vandersteens, which is the new speaker we were talking about. Model 3s, which are basically a large version of the 2s that I think today are probably kind of like what we call a JBL with finesse. It's kind of what I've always kind of labeled it as. And that's a speaker that's really capable of filling a big room at around $5,000 a pair. Then we get to the Trio CTs, which they sit right up in our living room in the store. And I think they're just absolutely one of the most exceptional values in the industry at I think just under $9,000. And again, those prices are per pair. Then we have the Quattro wood CTs that, shall we say, have the adjustable bass systems like the Quintos and the 7s. And you end up finding we're going to kind of discuss the Quintos right now, but we basically have the 2s and the Trio CTs, Quattro wood CTs, Quintos, and the 7s here at the store. So during the last year, you've had a new speaker under the flagship Model 7s called the Quinto. Tell us about that and what effect it has had on your business and what makes them so special.
Well, the Quinto is basically a replacement for our old Model 5 that was in production through several upgrades, been in production since, basically for 25 years. We did the 5A carbon, and that had some of the Model 7 technology put into the 5 structure, and was very successful. It's an amazing product, but it had a dated look. Basically people were wanting to see the bonnet go away, the size of the fabric, and just have the product be more narrow. So we basically took the Quattro and the best features of the Quattro and the best features of the 7 Mark IIs and built the Quinto with those technologies to replace the old Model 5 series. And at the same time, at that price point, there are aesthetic considerations. So the Quattros, there was a review written where even though the instructions say to not put these too far in the room because the mid-bass driver is deliberately overdamped enough so that you can keep it near the walls, because the Quattro and the Trio, they are, aesthetic and solutions, because not a lot of people want their speakers in the middle of the room.
Yep.
But it has a big impact on the lower mid-range upper bass. So in the case of the Quattro, a reviewer pulled them 8 feet into the room and then complained about how the lower mid-range upper bass was kind of lean, as it says will happen in the manual. But anyway, some people like them out into the room, the rule of thirds or what they call it. And most people want them near the wall. So what we decided to do in the Quinto is by moving the high pass up to 200 hertz, which meant we had to go to side firing woofers because you can't slot load and get good response, linear response up to 200 hertz. By going with the side firing woofers, we were able to move that 3 dB down point, the high pass, up to 200 hertz, wow, which gives the dealers that does the setup the option of putting them near a wall, or pull them out into the room, because you have a way to adjust that critical area between 100 and 200. It's part of the 11 bands that the dealer adjusts when he installs them into the room. And I believe in the real world, in a showroom where everything's optimized, this won't be immediately obvious. But when it comes to getting good sound in a room, in any room, regardless of where they need to be domestically or whatever, will prove to be very valuable. And it's that basic price point is just where a lot of audiophiles are going up to these days. It's an important price point to have a significant product in. And I think it's a 150% winner. It's everywhere we've taken it. Everyone that's gotten a pair, there's been nothing but just universal praise, whether they're in automotive finish or wood. It's also one of the few true high performance loudspeakers available in that category, where for the same money, you can get it in an automotive cut and buff finish as good as anyone in a finish quality as good as anyone in the industry, or in any exotic veneer other than ebony, or for the same price.
I know. I even had a customer that wanted a Wilsonite thing, and we were able to get that done as well. And so
we can do that. Yeah, we can do that also.
So
there are a lot of these high pressure laminates that have some really unique designs that work in a modern. You had a customer that had a more modern motif in their home, and it. I assume she was very pleased with it.
She is very pleased with it.
And girls, they tend to be that way. They want it to look the way they want it to look.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you the performance of that speaker and the ones that we've installed, again, the flexibility that you get with this adjustable bass system from the Quattro Wood CTs on up is just really, really amazing. And it's a very unique way of doing it. If anybody wants an explanation about it, I don't think we're going to get into it deep here because we're already about an hour and 10 minutes down the road. And we still got a bit here to discuss. I don't know how long Richard's willing to look at my face, so we'll move along.
Well, I'm glad you brought up how valuable that is, because I tell you what, as a manufacturer, it is a nightmare. 80 to 90% of our technical questions that we get are, how does it work? What does it do? There is a lot of marketing negative that comes with this insistence of this powered room EQ system that we have built into the Quattros, the Quintos, the Sevens, and the Fives in the past.
Yep.
It is a marketing nightmare because people don't understand it. They don't want to go there. And but I believe all rooms have bass problems, and without the ability to deal with that and not have to use a lot of DSP power to do it, which has its own sonic consequence, is mandatory. I will never make a speaker that doesn't have that ability, because everybody needs it. They may not realize it, but everybody needs it.
Well, the thing is, you don't realize you need it until you hear what it does.
That's true. And the weird part about it is when you get it set up, and I've had this happen to me, and I've had many, many customers. The dealer goes in and does the setup right, and they expect this great big change in the bass. Right. And they don't hear a great big change in the bass. What happens is they hear the mid-range open up. Well, all of that excessive energy that's caused by these room nodes, these peaks that you're able to tame, they end up muddying up the mid-range or collapsing the imaging or the sound stage. Mm-hmm. And its biggest impact is in the mid-range, which always surprises them, because are those adjustments in the mid-range? No, they're only in the bass, and they're only in the bass amplifier. They don't affect your mids and highs. Okay. I don't know if they don't believe me or they're just surprised by it. But
what's funny is I get a lot of, when I try and explain it to folks, and I've tried to get it to the very, most simplest thing. And I normally do get sometimes just kind of the yes man stuff, and he's not really getting it, but trying to go along. And I always try to stop and see if I can't make sure that he's connecting with what that is, because it is different. It is unique. There's nothing else like it in the industry. And I will tell you that the folks that have seen it and have actually heard the differences in operation, it's an amazing thing. It really does allow the speaker to get itself, and it's adjustable per speaker. So basically one speaker in the room gets to be adjusted for its place in the room, and another speaker gets adjusted for its place in the room, because not always are the environments that we're going into is this perfect room that we're going. As a matter of fact, the majority of them are not. So
Yeah, well said, Alan. And some people are nervous about the fact they don't want to be that dependent on a dealer if they should move out of the area. There is a video on our website. It's about an hour long, where I and Brad show you exactly how to do this yourself. The disc comes with the speakers, or you can download it off of our website. And it's a video that takes you through the whole process. So it's nothing to be, it's a little work, takes a little time, but it's nothing to be intimidated about.
I would be remiss here too if I did not mention you have new sub 3s that came out, was it last year?
Right.
Gosh, yeah.
That same ability in it.
Yep. So you can actually basically, we've done it a lot with Magnapans, believe it or not, where we've and at your suggestion, we took crossovers, and in between the preamp and the power amplifier, we put the crossovers in, and basically it does a slope to the bass performance that the sub understands and makes it up on its end. But we can do this with any pair of speakers. And what that does, for one, is make the amplifier work a lot less hard, meaning that it is going to sound better, because it's not doing the hardest thing it was designed to do, which is bass. And then you end up finding that at the same time, it relaxes the speaker because it's not having to do as much work either, because we've turned that over to the subs. Again, if you want a demonstration in any of these, I'd be happy to do that for anyone. And if you want to discuss it on the phone, I'm happy to do that as well. And by the way, guys, Richard does pick up his phone. So sorry, Richard.
No problem. Just ask for me. If I'm not there, the staff will find me for you.
Yeah.
And I will return your call.
And if you're my customer, talk to me first, just because I don't want Richard to, well, he'll tell you stories and. All right. So, so some of you out there may not be aware, but Vandersteen Audio has 2 amplifier models out, and they're both mono blocks. They're very unique as well. So tell us why you put this design on the market.
Well, in this whole thing about listenability and the amount of brain power required to fill in the blanks and everything, one of the things that I noticed, how do we make a speaker better than the 7 Mark II? And I said, well, we need to take some of these principles where the positive and the negative part of the waveform are carefully managed without the timing issues and everything that's caused by feedback. So both of these circuits that Dean and I have come up with are identical clones, one of single-ended amplifiers, and they're connected together with the speaker itself. So the signal path for the positive waveform and the negative waveform are identical. They're all in-channel. They're not complementary, because I discovered earlier on, many years ago, that you can buy complementary output devices, but they're not equal and opposite. In fact, they're really quite different. And out of that came this circuit that I wanted to do. Both of them use the same topology. One is just twice the power, one's liquid cooled and done to a very extreme level. And the littler one was more designed, and it has the 200 high pass in it, because I knew that amplifier was more designed for the Quinto, although it's been very popular to be used with Quattros. It's a little more money than what most people want to spend on a pair of Quattros. It was primarily designed for the future upcoming, which is now available, Quinto. It's a unique circuit. It has very, 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 very high resolution, but yet a listening ease about it that just has no fatigue. And that's where I am. That's what I need. And we don't intend to get into the amplifier or the electronic business. The only electronics Vandersteen Audio will ever do are very specific products that other companies really can't bother to do because the volume isn't high enough. I don't intend to be in competition with electronics companies. That was never my intent. It was to bring unique solutions that just aren't worth them bothering with, because they have a lot to do with what's particular about our loudspeaker. Although with a sub 3, you can use an M5 and drive any speaker in the world you want.
Yep.
And a few have done that. But because they're high pass amplifiers, but that puts the bass back in. So Yeah, that's what that's all about.
Awesome. Thank you. A couple of questions on that. Liquid cooled on the M7s.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, we claim no feedback. A lot of people claim no feedback, but there is this problem with bipolar or solid state devices, bipolars in particular, where their gain changes a lot with temperature. So you need to put a feedback loop in there in order to, as the temperature goes up and down, in order to change the gain of that circuit so that the true gain to compensate for that temperature so that the gain stays the same. Well, that is a moving form of feedback. Mm-hmm. So I decided what we need to do. And also we wanted to keep the, not have to use mica or silpad insulators on the output devices. So they're all mounted on a solid copper block without insulators because it's not the best capacitor in the world at a kind of a critical place. So the way we do it is we have that servo loop in there that controls the gain of the device. But once that copper heatsink hits 130 degrees Fahrenheit, that part of the circuit is disabled. And we control that by holding that at exactly 130 degrees by varying the speed of the pumps that pump the fluid through the two. What appear to be heat sinks on the outside of the amplifier are actually radiators. There's fluid running through them, transferring the heat from that copper block. And this allows that part of the circuit to really be nailed down stable so that we don't have that moving.
Okay. Does the fluid need to be changed at any time?
No, it's synthetic transformer fluid. Like once they banned PCPs and transformers hanging on the pole, yep. This is what they put in the transformers now. Very, very high dielectric synthetic transformer oil is all it is.
Are you aware of any other amplifier in the world that's using liquid cooling like that?
The transmitter I worked on in the Air Force, great big transmitter for data lines that we were supposed to use to communicate if everybody started throwing nuclear bombs. It was liquid cooled. That was a transmitter that had a tube as big as me.
Wow.
It was
wow.
But I'm not familiar with any amplifier that is. No.
Okay. Cool. So when we go to shows these days, we see a lot more Vandersteens are represented in the rooms, even though we can't go these days. I think Munich would have been this week, I think. Is that something along that lines? But that would have been wonderful to go. I had planned to go myself. But when we see them represented in rooms a lot more, tell us why that is. Why is that taking place?
Well, I don't know. There's different players. There's people working on the consequences of feedback. There's people looking at timing. MQA, when they brought that out, they borrowed a pair of 7s from us because they wanted a time and phase correct speaker to demonstrate what they were bringing to the table as far as timing issues were concerned. I don't know. It's kind of expensive and involves a lot of freight. We certainly don't promote that and end up pushing them. But when people ask, we try to accommodate them if we can.
As expected, a humble answer. Thank you, sir. All right, so I want to just take a break, do a little house cleaning here. I'd ask y'all to like and subscribe there on YouTube. Also, you have a place there where you can ask questions in the chat. We'll have a Q&A at the end of this, which is always fun and interesting at the end of the HiFi chats. Also, if you will, go to hifibuys.com and subscribe to our newsletter so you can be aware of what's going on now and in the future. Also want to thank our frontline folks for all the work they do out there. Appreciate what you're doing, and we all should behave ourselves and do our part to help them out. Also want to just talk about Lee Scoggins next week with Next Screen, which is the company that owns HiFi Plus and the Absolute Sound. Lee Scoggins is president, and we really look forward to seeing him. Another thing that came up was basically about feedback. And I see it in the discussion of forums and that kind of thing with your speakers. Can you tell us a little bit about how that works between feedback and an amplifier and your speakers?
Well, because we're time and phase correct, we're really trying to look at these timing intervals. Feedback is a form of time distortion. It's trying to make a correction after the fact. So early on, already for a long time, amplifiers that had very low or no feedback just tended to sound more musical on Vandersteens. And I think that's the perception people have, because they're obviously people that are into the importance of timing, and therefore their associated gear that they would naturally gravitate towards would also be. So they had a strong preference for tube amps, and if it was solid state. Now, most tube amps do use feedback, but it's a moderate amount, and of course in solid state, they no feedback became more and more popular. I believe that if you can get the distortion low enough without feedback, by making sure everything in the circuit is balanced well enough, make sure you have all your T's crossed and I's dotted, that it's going to make a better sounding circuit. The downside of no feedback in an amplifier is all woofers, especially large woofers in ported enclosures. In order to control that woofer, you need lots of feedback. So most of the manufacturers in our industry are forced to put some feedback in their amplifiers in order to control these woofers. In our amplifiers, for instance, that we build into the Quattros, the sub 3, all of our powered subwoofers, those amplifiers they're still all in channel. They're quasi comp amps, balanced bridge, but they're all no feedback, no emitter resistors. But they have lots of feedback in them. So in an ideal world, what you want is a lot of feedback to control woofers and no feedback for your mids and tweets. And we have that in a Vandersteen. That's the way you end up when you're, maybe unknowingly, but that's what you're going to end up with if you buy an amplifier that has no feedback to drive the upper end with. You've got tons of feedback in the low end controlling those woofers.
So in the Quattro wood CTs, Quintos, and sevens, there's quite a bit of feedback in the base amplifier.
A bunch.
All right, fair enough.
Some of them actually use what's called feed forward, which is not negative feedback, it's positive feedback. So you're taking a woofer, an enclosure, and an amplifier. We had a situation where a guy wanted to buy a pair of sevens, but he was upset about this cheap plate amp that runs the bottom end. And the dealer was trying to sell this guy because he had the money. He really wanted them. He loved the way they sounded, but he had some amplifiers that were $150,000 a pair. And he just didn't like the idea that all of his bass was going to be run by these cheap plate amps in the bottom of the speaker. And I thought about it, and so I said, well, have him call me. So I talked to the customer. I explained why. I says, look, we can model the driver, the enclosure, and the amplifier to do it perfectly. We can put lots of feedback in it. We can make it do what we want it to do. He just wasn't buying it. So then I had an idea one night. I'd say, so I called the dealer back and I said, hey, here's the wiring diagram. You go over there, bring the sevens to his house, pull that cheap plate amplifier out there, and here's the wiring code. Hook it up to his amplifier and drive the bottom end of the sevens with his $150,000 amplifiers. Monday morning, not long after 8 o'clock, I get a phone call. Are my amplifiers really that bad? I'm saying, no, they're not bad. But you don't have all that modeling advantage. It wasn't designed to do what it's doing. There's nothing wrong with your amplifier. You just don't have the advantages of modeling it together as a unit. Mm-hmm. And he ended up buying them.
Very good. What a great and clever way to go about that. Good for you. All right. So we kind of talked about this. The base system on the Quattros, Quintos, and 7 Mark IIs are unique in the industry. And we've kind of talked a little bit about that. Do you have anything else you want to add?
I just think that very, very few of your listeners and your customers that love music have rooms where you can get reasonably good bass response with some flexibility for flight. Even with a reasonable amount of flexibility, it makes room placement a nightmare. And what if that placement doesn't give you the best imaging? I just think it's mandatory. If I didn't believe that, when you realize how much grief I get for it, and the fact that no reviewer will ever use them as their personal pair because they need to be able to evaluate what an amplifier sounds like in the bass, they can't be having. Now, there are 2 reviewers that do have them, but for the most part, it doesn't work for them. And you get all the 80% of our technical questions. How does it work? Why does it work? Blah, blah, blah. It's just not a wise thing to do from a marketing standpoint. Yep. But I insist on doing it, and it's in everything we make where we can. I'd love to do it to the Model 1s and the Model 2. I just can't afford it. But it's too costly. But I just think it's mandatory.
As you said earlier, Richard will do it Richard's way. And I think you absolutely have a.
I do make those decisions, and you're right. But I do hope enough people agree to keep us in business.
Well, I did, and I bought a pair from you, as you know.
Yeah.
And do very much believe in the quality and the ability for a Vandersteen to sit in a room and do what it's supposed to. I think talking about the amplifiers is 2 different things, kind of like a bass amplifier needs to be one thing, and the mid-range, mid-bass, and tweeter and that kind of thing needs to kind of be handled in a different way. There's a really good explanation as to why, and that doesn't even come around to using the crossovers to free up that amp to sound better, nor does it come across with the equalization, nor does it come across with the contour that you have to be able to adjust the bass to the construction in the room and that kind of thing as well. There's just, there's an abundance of ability. And you said earlier that it is your belief that it's very difficult to get a bass right in a speaker in a room. And I think in reality, it's physics belief too.
Yeah. So in the end, it all comes down to physics. We all have to adhere to the same laws of physics because they're rules you're not going to defy.
Yep. So Richard, as we're all getting older, I get asked this occasionally about enlightening us about the people in the factory and who's going to come along to keep the music flowing out of Vandersteen Audio.
Oh, that's very, very secure. Enika and I, my wife Enika and I were blessed with 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls. And I'll start with the oldest, Jeff. All 4 of them work at Vandersteen Audio. All of them are financially part of it. And Jeff is responsible for all the finishes, does most of the automotive paint finishes and so forth, a lot of the veneering. And then we have our youngest son, Nathan. Nathan helped me do primarily most of the work on the Quinto, the CT stuff. He does all of to be time and phase correct, every single pair of speakers has to go into a chamber and get its crossover individually dialed to that pair in production. Nathan does all that work, but he also, with that same equipment in the anechoic chamber, has been learning how and studying under me and had a lot to do with the Quinto in our most recent products. Then then Jacqueline, our oldest daughter, she runs the office.
Boy, does she.
If you want to know what's going on at Vandersteen Audio, you need to ask Jacqueline because don't ask me. I don't have any clue. She's the one that runs the place, and she does a tremendous job. And then Katie is off in a little isolated place all by herself. She does the Model 7 crossovers in the speakers and stuffs all the circuit boards that have to do with our amplifiers. And then I do the final assembly on them. And I still make the cones, most of the cones and domes. They go into our carbon, the carbon stuff. But I do have an employee named Joe, and that's been with me a long, long time. He is slowly learning how and doing more of that cone technology also. So and then we have Brad for sales. And so we got everything covered. If something, heaven forbid, happens to me, I crash my airplane or whatever, they keep going.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I noticed is just the contribution that all your family members have. Obviously, I talk to Jacqueline a lot because she is the only one that knows what's going on around there. and I say that in the kindest way. She's a tough lady. I love her to death. I remember being there many years ago when the carbon fiber mid-range was being done and watching what an incredible process that you built to do that. And it's still something that just sticks in my head about, the complexity of building a driver like that. And you pulling this roll of carbon fiber out of that freezer and telling me what that cost, it was like, oh my gosh. So anyway, it's pretty impressive how far you've had to go to reach something that is in your mind and how technology came forward to be able to allow you to do it. So.
Yeah, it's in the freezer because otherwise it would go hard and we couldn't use it because it would cure. The only reason the A and the B don't get friendly and harden is because it's below cure temperature. That's why it's in the freezer. But that material is 120 million PSI tensile strength. That's still the stiffest carbon fiber material available today. They haven't advanced beyond that yet. Now it's used in our tweeter in the mid-range, not what we use in the woofers. We use some material that's cheaper because that stuff's about many thousands of dollars per pound.
Mm-hmm.
So, yep.
Pretty amazing. We've got a couple more questions before we get to Q&A. So I'll ask y'all, you can ask questions in the chat there. Please like and subscribe. And don't forget to go to hifibuys.com and sign up to our newsletter so you'll know about what we have coming in the future and look forward to your participation in that. Patents. I know that you've got, a patent or two out there. We've never really discussed it that much, but how many are they? What are they? I know we talked about one earlier that had expired, and I realize you don't count them up and hang them on your wall, I don't think, but, tell us about them.
No, we don't license them to anyone. The whole idea was to, some of these things were incredibly expensive to tool up, and I just wanted to protect them. The first one had to do with the non-reflective zone behind you have as much energy coming off the back of a cone as you do the front of a cone. And that typically in the past would hit this big magnet, a magnet that was about the same diameter as a mid-range cone, and reflect all of that energy through the cone, all confused and jumbled up. Again, noise out of sync with the original sound. And that patent has expired. Then there's another patent that has to do with a way to make a three-way speaker act as a point source. And that's the patent that the VCC5 and the VCC2 are based on. And
those are center channels, by the way, folks.
Yeah, I believe those are still current. I'm not sure. I don't pay a whole lot of attention to it. And then we have the patent on the balsa carbon discovery was so dramatic. And Mike Lactus from HRS helped me a lot with that because he knew people that were into the aerospace, big time into the aerospace industry. And we used all normal foams. We spent a lot of money and a lot of time exhausting any way of making a monolithic cone, and none of them proved to be adequate. And then I discovered on my own the idea of using the balsa and forming the truss shape, which gave us a Z dimension to turn it into a truss like the roof of your home. Mm-hmm. And gave us the stiffness we need, and also gave us a lot of quieting. The balsa happens to be the best damping agent known to man. That's why GM uses it in the floorboard of the Corvettes. It's not to make it lightweight and strong. It's to keep road noise from coming up through the floorboards of the car. Makes it quieter inside. So what little character carbon fiber has, or sonic character carbon fiber has, the majority of that is then reduced even more by the fact that the balsa is, and the tweeter and the mid-range and the woofer of the Model 7 Mark II are made that way. So that's an existing patent. And then I've been playing around with dielectric biasing of capacitors for a long time. Thought it had advantages in wires potentially, and Bill Lowe and I together basically said, "Hey, Bill, patent this thing and we'll share it." And that became the DBS, and they've of course taken it way beyond that to involve power, and Garth has taken it even beyond. But the original, that was partly one of the original patents, and I think that's it.
Okay.
Very expensive, and unless you're going to license them and make money on them, unless you're trying to protect something that's really significant, they're really not. Or going to license it to somebody and make a lot of money off of them so that you don't have to go through the work of making them. They're of limited value.
Well, one thing I've loved about you and Mike and so many other people in this industry is y'all getting together and sharing your knowledge. I've been to shows with you guys, hear you talking across the tables and that kind of thing about different things. I've learned so much in those conversations, and all of y'all have been a huge contributor to my ability to further my education and ability to be able to give people better sound. And it's amazing to think how many times y'all have been together and the conversations that you have and how you're able to contribute to each other's business and help them make a better product through kind of the community. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah, there's a lot of it we share because it's a system we're building here. It's to everybody's enjoyment. We get this system going. But you do also need to be careful. Somebody says, well, what do you mean? There's some of your ideas that you need to protect and keep very close, because think about how long society drug these great big chunks of granite around and everything before somebody threw a log under it and invented the wheel. There really is nothing simpler than inventing the wheel. But man lived without it for a long time. And what's simpler than a wheel? So sometimes you have to protect things that are incredibly simple. They're only simple after you've discovered them. And then there are things that you can share, but you can't share everything because we all, in the end, are still in competition with each other.
As we are with motorcycles, vacation homes, so on and so forth.
Everything else, there still is commerce. You still need to pay the bill. So,
yep, absolutely. I get that. So simpler than the wheel, would that be the pet rock?
Yeah, right.
Or a stick? All right. So in this crazy world right now, how have you had to adjust your workflow and kind of, your world?
Well, we were shut down for 6 weeks. I continued going to the office to take care and receive UPS and any shipments that were already on the way. But all my employees were at home. They still got their full pay and everything because they're very, very valuable people, and they have house payments to make and everything. So, and then of course the government came up with the payroll protection program, which we finally got the money for. It's a good thing we were financially in good enough shape to cover my employees until the government, but it's there and it's compensated for that time. That I sure hope we find a better solution next time, though, because we cannot, surviving a virus or a bad bug like this is important. We shut this economy down, and if our standard of living or our way of life, some people may not wish to survive it if there isn't a good standard of living left at the end. We need a better solution than what this has been.
I think one of the things we're all doing is adjusting, and I'll just kind of put this out there from my own personal self. This is not politics or anything. So I think one of the things that we all are going to learn to do, like we do every day, we don't go out and drive a car at 190 miles an hour on a freeway because it's not safe. Some of you might, but so we make judgments on what is proper for us and what the risks are and associated and what that balance is. Another thing that I found, I think we've all seen one of our friends go a little bit nuts or something along that lines. And that's not to say that their opinion is wrong, that sometimes we have expectations of people wanting to have an understanding or believe the same way that we do. And this is one of those situations where there are a billion different opinions and feelings about this, and we should have absolutely zero expectations of having anyone else believe or think like we do about it.
That's right. It's an individual thing, and I think ultimately in the end it comes down to personal responsibility.
Yep.
And protect the ones at risk, do the best you can, and find a way to keep on living.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
So the old-fashioned handshake may have gone bye-bye now. Well, a fist bump will work.
Yep, absolutely. We got the HiFi where we tap our left feet and then our right feet. So, but listen, Richard, this has been, as always, with you, a very interesting conversation. I appreciate you being here. We're going to open up to some Q&A. You ready to answer some questions for some folks?
I'll give it a whirl.
All right. If you lack,
just make sure your folks understand that it shouldn't be a question that's covered in the owner's manuals. Because our time is precious. Anyway,
Richard on the phone. Why the hell you calling me?
The dealer is actually more apt at answering than I am. But anyway, let's go.
I already told him they could call me. All right. So from Hank A. Hey Hank. Glad to have you on. Good to have you guys back. One question: how much difference does the optional plinth make on the Model 7 Mark II?
Well, is it day and night? No. They play music just fine with or without. But it is large in the sense that the sound stage is like a lid is lifted off of the top. And because of the kinetic energy of that push-pull 12 flying around in there playing bass, it does cause some. The cabinet on the Model 7 is totally inert.
Yes.
Those panels are not resonating, but we do have enough kinetic energy in there. It's like a jackhammer in the bottom trying to lift that thing up and down, and adding another 100 pounds of mass that's actually decoupled but part of the speaker has lowered that form of distortion dramatically. So in the end, it's quite significant. Certainly worth the $10,000 that it costs, because nowadays many people spend a lot more money than that and get it for a smaller change. It's not mandatory, but it's definitely in a high performance system, and all Model 7s are going to be in high performance systems. It's definitely audible. Okay.
Because anytime that speaker moves of any kind, the drivers are kind of moving along with it, and so there's either noise added or a lack of detail.
Yeah, well, it's canceling energy. It's canceling work it's done, which does compromise the dynamic contrast. Some of the work that was supposed to move air ain't happening.
Yep. Okay. All right. So that was not in the manual, correct?
That's a good question. That was not in the manual.
All right. I got another one from GT. Hey, GT. Nice hearing from you. He says, I had the privilege of meeting you at HiFi Buys event a couple of years ago and owned a pair of Quattro CTs that I purchased from Alan. Thank you. Now that your team has found a way to install the carbon balsa core mid-range driver from the 7 and the Quattro cabinet, curious if and when Vandersteen Audio will offer that feature as an upgrade to the Quattro. Expect that there are a lot of other Quattro owners keen to have that option.
Well, that's basically what the Quinto is. That's what it costs. We added the plinth, which is not removable because I wanted more vertical height. We could afford to make it heavier and more costly. So we learned some from the Model 7 that getting that image height up and aiming down at the listener slightly instead of having to project up gave us better sound staging. But basically, in essence, that's what the Quinto is. So the best way to modify a Quattro CT to the Model 7 Mark II mid-range, the only way right now would be to get a pair of Quintos.
Yep.
Because in a nutshell, it's a little more than that, but in a nutshell, that's what the Quinto is.
Mm-hmm. And the one thing that I can tell you, the cost of manufacturing.
Let me add one more thing to it. You can't just simply, and we spoke earlier about how when you improve one range, you have to move everything up around it. Well, that's what you're talking about. You can't just take that mid-range and put it into the Quattro.
And say, boom, you got one.
The mid-bass, and one neat thing, even though the mid-bass driver is the same, because we moved the high pass from 100 up to 200 because we have the side firing woofers, that made the very same 6.5-inch mid-bass driver now more dynamic and more articulate because it has one less octave of work to do.
Yep.
So it's just like advancing the driver, even though we didn't have to.
Isn't it kind of funny? Every time you take a little bit of work away from something, everything relaxes.
It happens to me too.
Yep. I was going to actually ask you that. All right. So
one of the things that we didn't touch on earlier that is very important, way back in the MPEG 3 days, there was an experiment. How much information can we throw away and still have people hear the music and enjoy the music or whatever? And there's a lot of controversy about that because we humans have the ability to fill in the blanks. So when people listen to different speakers made none time, and they all say, well, there's a lot of good sounding speakers out there, and they are. So what is the reason for this whole time and phase thing? And the reason is so that you force the brain to not have to fill in the blanks as much, that you make it more realistic, less fatiguing, easier to listen to. Because the one thing they've discovered, when your brain has to fill in the blanks a lot, it is fatiguing. It takes a lot of brain power. And it's all about how long you can listen. We used to think you need to lower the resolution so you can listen all day. It's exactly the opposite. You need to increase the resolution so that your brain doesn't have to fill in the blanks as much, and you're not as fatigued, so you can listen longer.
That is such an interesting point because, again, we've talked about noise. And if you think about it, you take what is real and you reduce the resolution, meaning have less sound, and your brain has to work hard. And then if you have all the resolution and you add noise to it, your brain has to work hard there too.
That's right.
We have to find that middle place to truly have something that is just, hitting it. So,
but isn't it quite often on the blogs and everything you'll read is, these are, they're so polite that you can listen to them all day. People unknowingly are thinking that long-term listenability has to do with low resolution when it's actually the opposite that's true. It's high resolution without the contrast turned all the way up to fake it. It's legitimate increased resolution.
It's like getting that TV from us or Best Buy because they all come out of the box in the same way. But you go home, you put it on the wall, and it's like blinding. And at first you go, wow. And then in about 20 minutes, you're going, oh my God, I need my sunshades.
But Alan, the beauty on a TV is you get to adjust it.
Yes.
When the customer goes, wow, I'm going to buy those, by the time his check clears and he discovers that his brain's working too hard and he don't like it, you can't adjust it. He has to go out and buy a new pair of speakers.
Richard, one of the kindest things that I've ever had anybody tell me, and we've got a rather reference system, I would say absolutely a reference system back in the back with your sevens in there. And I've had people fall asleep in that room and say, I can't buy this. It doesn't have that excitement. And after they've gone out and spent a bunch of money on a couple other pairs of speakers, come back to me in a few years and have bought a pair or two in that exact same scenario, realizing that, my gosh, I now understand what this is. I just think a lot of times, I think what I see is a lot of times people don't spend enough time in front of something to really realize what it's doing. Because as you have something that is at another level, you do have to basically, there's listening is a learned thing. Yep. So what you end up doing is you raise the level of your learning, and until you get to the point, you don't really know what that speaker is doing. And I've had many, many, many folks that I've worked with that I feel like have never really spent enough time to really understand. And, I wished I could help them in that endeavor, but, I'm never going to force anybody.
A lot of good listeners out there, Alan. The problem is discernment comes with time and experience.
Yep, absolutely. That's a really, really great point. All right, GT, again, and thank you again for the great questions, GT. For components in my system, replacing the stock power cords with aftermarket cords, most notably AudioQuest Hurricanes, which are absolutely amazing, and thank you, has produced a large improvement in sound. Do you recommend replacing the stock power cords supplied with the Quattros with aftermarket cords, and if so, which ones?
Well, that's a good question, and it's a complicated answer because in the case of the Quattro, the 5, the 7s, or whatever, it depends where the weak link is in your system and where your money, your $1,000 or whatever it is, $2,000 is best spent. They do make power cords that there are some restrictions as to which ones will fit the amplifiers on those products because there can be some interference problems.
Yep.
You can work that out with Alan. But remember one thing, make sure that it is the next prudent place to put money. Because I had a customer call me, I don't remember where they were from, and they said that they'd heard this difference going to a power cord and had heard that I didn't recommend them. And I said, well, that's not true. I'm saying make sure you like what you get and that is the best place, the weakest link in your system right now and going to give you the biggest improvement. And I said, what did you hear? And he said, well, I actually have a little less bass, but it's more controlled. And I said, well, you could put the stock power cord in, turn the level down a little bit and lower the contour and get the same thing. In our subwoofer amplifiers, because of the level and the contour, you do have some adjustment there. And all I'm saying is they are better. Alan knows which ones are truly better but I'm just saying I have to, where I want people to get the best sound they can get for the money.
Yep.
I have to just caution people to make sure that is the weak link in their system, the best place to it. Because I think the power cord on their main amplifier or their preamp or their DAC would be far more important. Yep. Once you've done all that, and that's the weakest link, go for it, because they do make an improvement. And I only recommend the AudioQuest ones. Most power cords do nothing right. They compromise dynamics. They simply just change the sound, and there's no real obvious advantage to it. But the recent AudioQuest cords, and your Vandersteen dealers, Alan especially, will know which ones to recommend. You can try them and see what you think. But they do deliver more short-term current and do improve the bass.
GT, to help you out on that just a little bit, AudioQuest does have some ends that you can use with like Hurricanes to plug in there that you can actually fit inside of that. It's the heat sinks around the amplifier that basically create the ability for them not to use the standard plug that comes with it. But we have actually done that on several other pairs of speakers and have found that to be very, very, very effective. I would also, if you want to call and discuss it to figure out, because the power cords that you did reduced a whole bunch of noise, and that's why you heard this huge difference. And I absolutely concur with that. So what I would recommend is maybe giving me a buzz and see where is the best place for us to reduce noise, because it may be somewhere else in the system. Okay.
Yeah, good point.
All right. Let's see here. Gary from Illinois. Love this question, Gary. I own a pair of VLR wood speakers and plan on upgrading to the VLR CTs. They are spectacular speakers. Just wondering, why have there been so few reviews of either model in the audio press? I just like to validate my opinion. So Gary, I will help you. Yes, they are awesome. Richard, you want to comment on that, please?
Yeah, we have never, if you look at the history of Vandersteen Audio, we've never really led with reviews. Reviews can cause a tremendous peak. Some people that don't even know what they are buy them because of a positive review. And then they find out for one reason or another that it's not a fit for them. And it puts them on the used market. You have all problems. We have always made sure that our products found the people that really knew what they were, had their own confidence to make that decision and their own belief and their own discernment, make that decision and buy them. Get that product selling really, really well. Get its legs underneath it, so to speak, like a child learning how to walk. And then we have put them out for review because today you do need to keep your name in the limelight. But we have never marketed anything by leading with a review. personally, myself as an individual, I would never make a decision of anything I bought in my own personal life based on someone else's opinion. My opinion is the only one that matters.
Yep.
And I'm not saying you need to be that way, but that's one reason why you don't see a lot of reviews on Vandersteen products in general. It's not really part of our marketing plan.
You're also one of those guys that you are not going to believe what you read. You're going to actually do the test to determine whether it really is for real or not, because for one, you have that ability, and you can actually get to the bottom of it for your very own self. Not everybody else out there has that ability. So anyway, it is unique within you. So.
Well, maybe, but I mean, whatever you buy has got to work for the individual, and people have individual requirements, and it may or may not be shared by what a particular reviewer's response would be. I'm not saying they're bad. It's just never been a part of what we lead with as far as marketing is concerned.
Yep.
We've got a lot of good reviews and a lot of good reviewers. Those guys are good. They know what they're doing. Anyway, that's why.
Yeah, I mean, the reviewers have a tough job. I couldn't imagine listening to product after product after product and trying to write a kind review about them all and trying to make them unique and different. I don't know how they do it. So, but then again, I'm not a writer.
You got to be tough. But in the VLR CT case, they're not easy to make. They need to go into the chamber. People like yourself are discovering on their own, and we really don't need to push them. They're selling just fine.
Yep.
It's anyway.
All right, cool. So anyway, next question from Mitch K. I have 30-year-old Vandersteen 2Cs, and it's time for an upgrade. I see great reviews for Golden Ear Technology, Triton Reference, and Vandersteen Audio Quattro Wood CT. A few questions. What is the value of the stereo file review with comparison to products within the same range? Why does the speaker need to be paired with this amplifier to achieve the A full range rating? How does one compare two products when side-by-side listening is not available? Well, if you need me to go over those again, I'm happy to.
Yeah, I think that's an unfair evaluation of John's review of the Quattro. He did review the Quattro CT. He also reviewed the M5 high-pass amplifier with it. He did say there was a synergistic combination, but he actually preferred the sound of his other reference amp. I forget what it was. Mm-hmm. So he's not implying that you can't have this speaker without that amplifier. In the very review itself, there are lots of good ways. Your dealer, Alan, can help you find lots of good ways to drive a pair of Quattros. Our amplifier is not required. For my own taste, I think, for one thing, a lot of people aren't going to spend $16,000 driving a $15,000, $16,000 loudspeaker. Usually people try to buy their amp and preamp for that amount. So I think that's an unfair assessment of what the review says. Mm-hmm. And he just said this is one way, but he actually preferred another way. So I would not infer that out of that review. It's just it's a good combination, but not the only combination.
Yep. I totally agree. One thing, how does one compare two products?
As far as Golden Ear or any old product, I'm not going to really talk about any product in general. They can bring a lot of value to the market because they're sourced out of China. We don't use any Chinese components in ours. Ours are American made. We use Scandinavian drivers, and this means a lot to a lot of people. It means a lot to me. We need Americans being able to work and build things. You just need to listen to these products, and if you like what we do for that amount of money, then fine. Vandersteens might be for you. On the other hand, they are more oriented to a mainstream sound type of sound, a little more bass than what's really there maybe, and a little more technicolor, the contrast turned up a little bit. If that's a fit for you, then maybe that'd be a better purchase. Mm-hmm. They're not really the same thing. You need to go out with your own ears, bring your own music, and find out what works for you.
Yep.
Good question.
And you definitely, if you listen to those two, Mitch, you'll definitely hear a difference between the two, especially if they're both set up well and that kind of thing, which I know any of the Vandersteen dealers will have them set up properly. So, I wouldn't have any problem going out and trusting your ears. Okay.
On the other hand, as a mainstream product, there's nothing wrong with that product. It serves a function for those people where that's a fit for their needs.
Yep, absolutely. Mitch, thank you very much for the questions. I was going to say question, but it was multiples. Thank you. So from Amy B. Hey, Amy, what tone/performance qualities are you looking for when you voice your speakers?
Oh, speaker voicing is kind of an interesting thing. I can honestly say that I don't believe in voicing. We do live verses. We try to make the speaker replicate the signal that comes from the amplifier, which came from the CD or from the record, as best we can. Nothing's perfect. Earlier on in the interview, we talked about East Coast sound, West Coast sound. That was voicing, where you deliberately went into one sound. Now, I'm not saying that I'm so prudish or such a arrogant guy that if I discovered some little phobo that was not right, that served all music and made my speaker more enjoyable in all ways on all music, I'm not saying I wouldn't put it in the speaker. The problem is I've never found a little bit brighter tweeter or a little bit of a push in the mid-range to serve all music. It made piano sound more like piano, but the violins would tear the paint off the walls. I just never have discovered. So I just play music and replicate it and record it and play it back double blind. I've made my own master recordings that I use for all R&D, because when you listen to a recording, you never know how it was made. You need to have a reference where you knew I was there when these recordings were made. And I tried to replicate that as perfectly at all these different price points as I can. Again, understanding it isn't perfect.
Yep. I think I've always used kind of the thing that the speaker doesn't, people say, well, is this a rock speaker or a classical speaker or that kind of thing? And I've never, ever believed that. I've always told everybody that the speaker has no clue what it's playing. It's just playing sounds. It either does them all reasonably correctly or it doesn't. So my recommendation to anyone in this situation, or whatever we might kind of be discussing here, is to have different types of music and different scales of music and play on it. And does it sound good to you? And I think you end up finding that that the things that shine in a speaker or create that listener fatigue or those kind of things will kind of come out. Okay. And I think you'll find that pretty easy to be able to find. All right. So Amy B again. Hey, Amy. You're doing great. What are the components of your test system?
Well, I have my own reference amplifiers and stuff I've made. Mostly it's these, when it really comes down to it, these master tapes that I've made. But I use all different kinds of sources. I use all different kinds of music. Once I get out of the designer mode and I just want to enjoy music, I enjoy music, and a full spectrum of music, all kinds of music. I tend to prefer music where I can tell what instrument made the sound. I'm not heavy into the all the electronic stuff and everything, but I do have some of it. Some of it's very interesting, and but there's a point where I stop evaluating in most of my life, where I actually just listen to the music and let the music speak to me. Let it emotionally do what it's supposed to do.
Yep. If it puts those tinglies on your arms, just getting it.
Yep. Right.
All right. So I think she asked about components. So I'll just, you have, I think, 7s in your system, obviously, that you made, and your 7 HP amplifiers and that kind of thing. I think you've got a Brinkman turntable in there.
Yep.
So
light cartridge.
Yep. Absolutely. That's where I'm at too. So
those cables.
Yep. I myself am AudioQuest all the way through at home and at the store. I don't do any other cables. So thank you, Amy, very much. Great question. So I'm going to take a question here from Rubiera 58, screen name there. Aside from the superior mid-range of the Carbon/Balsa driver, what are the benefits of the side-firing woofers plus additional platform in the Quinto design versus down-firing? And continues, in terms of a real world situation, would side firing woofers allow for enhanced low end performance in an approximately 12 by 26 room with a suspended floor?
It's a good question. The best way to do bass is always downfire slot loading because it acts as an impedance transformer where you could match the impedance within the woofer enclosure itself to the impedance of the room. It's actually like a transfer that's going on. And this can be better controlled and is always going to be more linear downfiring slot loaded. But it's limited to about 80 or 100 hertz. You can't really do it higher than that because frequencies higher than 100 hertz become directional. As I spoke earlier in the Quinto, for room flexibility and everything, we wanted to move that high pass up to 200 hertz. So we threw a lot of money at those drivers and really pushed the limits on the technology within those drivers and the amplifier driving it to make up for some of the shortfall that we had for not being in an ideal situation in order to move that high pass up to 200 hertz to give us greater flexibility in real rooms. So in the end, I now believe that the side firing woofers, because it allows you to move the high pass up to 200 hertz, is superior. But as far as deep bass is concerned, it's always going to be better downfiring and slot loaded because of the impedance mismatch of the woofer to the room.
And all of your subwoofers are made that way.
Exactly. And the as far as the pedestal, which is not removable, that's part of the Quinto. That's purely aesthetic. I just wanted to get that driver group for alignment up higher, 3 inches higher into the room. You can do that with a pair of Quattro, setting it on a 3-inch slab of marble, and then realign it and tip it down a little bit. And if one wanted to, or the Trio 2 for that matter.
Yep, we've done that here. Okay, thank you very much.
Hey, Alan, could I excuse myself again for just a few?
Sure, guys.
Right back.
All right, folks. Obviously, I can't believe it. We are on 2 hours and 10 minutes here. But anyway, Richard is always such a fun conversationalist. And actually, it's always amazing what I learn. I'm sure everybody else has learned stuff. And James R., we're going to get to your question next. And it looks like we've got about 5 more questions after that. So anyway, I'll ask y'all if you will to like and subscribe there on the screen. And again, ask questions in the chat. If you have more, we'd love to have them. Also, if you don't mind going to hifibuys.com and subscribe to our newsletter so you can be informed of what we have going on now and in the future as well. Also, want to let you know we'll have Lee Scoggins, who is Senior VP with Next Screen, which is the owner of HiFi Plus and the Absolute Sound. So we're going to review the reviewers. Anyway, no, Lee, that's not going to be that tough. But anyway, we really look forward to having him out here. Let's see. Also want to thank the frontline folks. You guys, again, have just been amazing. I hope everybody is minding their cues out there. I know we are here at the store. We're excited about opening on Monday. We're going to do a Monday through Saturday from 11 to 4. And look forward to being here as you enter the store, which you should expect is us in mask. And we have gloves and masks available for people, as well as all kinds of this stuff right here all over the store. So anyway, we got you covered. We want you healthy. We'll respect your space while you're here. And we'll ask you to do the same with us. So the main thing is about keeping us all healthy as we kind of get down the road and to march some time down the road so that we can get rid of this thing and we can all get back to having some fun.
Thank you, Alan. You don't have to be a speaker engineer to know that if you put it in, it's got to come out sooner.
Yeah. Well, you've seen how much water I've been drinking. So Richard, thank you very much. Have James R here. Hey, James. So hi, Richard and Alan. I'm a Vandersteen 5A user and really like them. And we do too. Thanks, he says. Can additional subwoofers work well to enhance the already good 5A bass? I see that Vandersteen now has additional subs for the 7/9 system. And maybe for Alan, this is a question for me as well. For amplifiers, what would you say are best in the 10 to 15K price range, tube versus solid state?
All right, I'll take my part of that first.
Okay.
We have for 35, 40 years always recommended multiple sources for bass. It's kind of a popular thing to read about these days.
Yep.
Recommended. I run 6 subwoofers here in my home. Alan's been here. I've been here for 30 years. So whenever you use more sources for bass in a room, assuming you're doing it well and they're adjusted correctly, you will get more linear response in the room because the average is better. So adding subwoofers to the Model 5s or any speaker for that matter, properly done, will always be an advantage, especially if you have no means of correcting for the inevitable problems you're going to have in a room. Now, in your 5s, if you've properly adjusted the bass, that's not so important. You read a lot about multiple woofers, and that's really important if you have no way to adjust it, because that's the only way to correct some of the problems, but not all of the problems. So adding more subs, there's no reason in the world not to do it. Just make sure you do it properly so it doesn't muddy up what you've already got that you're loving. Yours.
Totally agree. I think with the 5As as well, you have an opportunity if you add Vandersteen subs to actually detune the 5As, and they'll sound better. And you can make that up with the subwoofers, and overall the system will actually magnify in a pretty big way. Happy to demonstrate that here for you at the store as well. So thank you very much, James. That was a great question. Also, I guess I need to answer my end. I will tell you, we've got 2 pairs of 5As out there with the new high pass 5 HP amplifiers by Vandersteen. And those customers are extremely, extremely happy. One came from a solid state amplifier and another came from a really great tube company. So, you know, I would probably say that's one of the first places that I would put it, even though it is at the height of your price range. But I would certainly investigate that. We have them here at the store too. So if you want to try them and take them home, we're happy to do that for you. Okay. Let's see. Next question, Rob T. I own the Trio CTs and they are extremely inefficient. Why are they so hard to drive?
Well, they're not hard to drive. They're very easy to drive. But they are low in sensitivity, about 83, 84. Once you strip all this noise that we talked about, so to be time and phase correct, we're under some pretty severe limitations. We can only use one tweeter because multiple tweeters will smear each other. I'm not into smear. We can only use one mid-range because multiple mid-ranges will smear each other. We're not into smear. That mid-range can only be about 3.5, 4 inches in diameter, or it starts, the frequencies coming off of it start tripping over themselves because part of the cone starts acting like a baffle, moving to boot. We're limited to woofers 8 inches or less if we want to go up to a crossover of 600, 900 cycles. So if you take the biggest magnets you can get without saturating the steel parts, you put a good voice coil in there. You make sure you have a non-resonant pistonic driver so that it's not ringing all over the place. You strip all the noise out of the cone, and no matter who you make it or how much magnet you put on it, because if you put more magnet, it just saturates the parts, and the BL factor, the magnetism in the gap that makes the driver work, actually goes down. And when you're all said and done, you're going to end up with about 83, 84 to 85 dB at best, no matter who does it. The only way to raise that is to start doubling up with drivers. That will give you an improved sensitivity. However, you then have to deal with the smear. Amplifier power nowadays is not that expensive. Power is really not the problem. But if you want to eliminate the noise to the point that we have for better imaging, a better sonic picture at the end of the room, and you strip the noise out of the cone and get them pistonic, or you have to go way larger on the diameter, which has its own diffractive effects and can't react to the nuances to do what's important to me. So it's an engineering choice I've made because I want the drivers to be pistonic, I want them to be clean, and I don't want them to have phase problems out of band. And I don't want them ringing. Good question.
Yep, it is a great question, Rob. And listen, if you want to call me and kind of bounce that around a little bit, I'm happy to try and help you with it. I have Trio CTs here at the store, as you know. So anyway, be very happy to work with you and try and help get to the place that you're after. Okay.
Alan, they're not hard to drive. They're very,
No.
very easy loads, but you do need the voltage swing. You do need a 100-watt amplifier on them.
Yep. I've actually got a Prima Luna Evo 400 on them here at the store, which is, believe it or not, 70 watts per channel, and it does amazingly well with it.
That should do. Tube amps tend to punch about, a 70-watt tube amp's going to punch like about 150 watt solid state.
Yep.
They don't really. Watts are watts, but
Yep.
because tube amps clip more gracefully, they seem to sound like a solid state amp twice their size.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Very good. Rob T, again, thank you for your question. Scott H. All right. Can 2CE SIG 2s be upgraded to the new SIG 3s? I want to ask, is this the first time you've been asked this question?
Yes.
Way to go, Scott. It's not in the manual.
No, they can't be upgraded.
Okay.
Yes, theoretically, let me answer that honestly. Yes, they could. But by the time they would have to be shipped to the factory, and by the time you tore the whole thing apart, put the whole new crossover and built it back up, put it in the chamber and tuned it and shipped it back to the customer, it would be an embarrassing amount of money. It would just be too, you're looking at a $1,500 mod when you factor all of that extra freight and everything. It would be, so yes, it could be done, but it'd be embarrassing.
It's probably cheaper to trade them in.
Exactly.
Or sell them on your own and
move to a trio and have a more inner enclosure, better driver technology, better aesthetics, and be on to building a system that can punch way beyond what the two can.
Yep, absolutely. All right. So Todd, by the way, Scott, thank you very much for the question. I knew it was going to get asked, and I'm glad that it did. So we got Todd F. What about the future of digital filter networks in place of analog? It seems like a lot more is possible that is very hard to do with a bunch of discrete components. It's a great question, Todd.
That's a great question, but I fundamentally disagree with it. DSP power is amazing, and you can do a lot with it, but it is not without penalty. And if you know what you're doing with good driver technology, where you're able to juxtapose what imperfections a driver may have to the deliberate then inaccuracies that you can put in the crossover, so the combination of the two can give you a better result at the listener. In all frequencies, let's say 150 and above, is very simple to do with passive components. There is no power supply and digital processor and DAC and all of that computing that will ever be as transparent sounding as a really good, high quality dielectric capacitor, good film and foil capacitor, and air core inductors. It is against the laws of physics. We all need to comply with the laws of physics. And one of the issues, anytime you transfer energy, there are losses. So for those who are still, our industry is still defined by how well something performs with master tape or an analog source. Digital is getting very good. This is not an anti-digital statement, but many people are still using 100% analog sources. And to go through the whole A to D process and then D to A again in order to do something as simple as a crossover in the hands of somebody that knows what they're doing, there's just no way you're going to come to the same point. There is no advantage. Now, at the low price points where you can build a cheap box, throw cheap, moderately priced to cheap Chinese drivers in it, put a digital, a Class D amplifier in it, throw it in the chamber, zap it, burn an EEPROM, put that in the amplifier. Now you flatten it out, correct it for the cheap drivers in the cabinets, and QC'd it all in one stop. I do believe you could make a decent speaker at lower price points doing that. But at the state-of-the-art end of the business where we are, where I prefer to do my commerce, there's just no way that will ever be an advantage. It's not going to happen. Too many energy conversions.
Yep. And it adds noise.
Yes. And power supply sensitivity, everything.
Yep. Absolutely.
Good question, though, because there is a lot that can be done DSP, but a lot of times this exercise in what can be done is futile if you're solving a problem that doesn't exist. It's like once how you make a speaker cabinet quiet, whether you do that cost effectively or whether you do it at a very extremely expensive way. Once you get that cabinet to where its output is 60 to 70 dB below the reference level, the problem is gone. There's no need to throw more money at it. You might as well start throwing money at another source that needs another part of the loudspeaker that needs to be improved. Anyway, I love that question because we are in a digital age and digital is getting better and better, but it still is dealing with energy, and we need to make sure the end result serves music.
Yep. And sounds natural to our ears.
Yep.
Because our brains are enormously capable. At least
Now,
some of them.
one more add to that. If a guy's going to be 100% digital, and that's all he ever wants to do is have digital as his source,
yep.
Then he's already in the digital domain. The consequences would be very low. And I guess I can finally answer his question by saying, if I got to that point, I would make the whole digital chain. I would make a speaker that's for people that are 100% digital. And we're just not at that point yet.
Yep. Some believe we are, but I'm kind of with you. I'm not kind of with you. I'm absolutely with you.
Well, some that are. That's what they need to buy. I'm not saying they're wrong.
Yep. That's exactly right.
A good fit for them.
So, Todd, thank you very much for the question. It's good for us to have that information out there. So this is our last question. Steve from Atlanta, and Rob Tuck, I understand you want to talk after this. I'll be happy to, but give me a few minutes. So this is from Steve from Atlanta. What do you think about Dirac room correction?
I get this question a lot.
I know you do.
We've already partially answered it.
Yes.
To do room correction that can be so easily done the way we do it in the subwoofer section of a loudspeaker without extra processing or any extra components or extra anything in the signal path that has to do with the mid-range and high end is just, I think, a less transparent, less good sounding way to do it. Many people, Stereophile magazine years and years ago had a picture of some kind of room correction thing. And the title on the front cover was, "We've heard the future," or something like that. And then we didn't hear much about it afterwards. And when you do a demonstration at the show and you hear what happens when you do bass EQ, just like when Alan goes in and dials in a pair of Quattros or Sevens or Quintos for a customer, and they hear what fixing the bass problems can do for the sound, you're amazed. But when you do that digital with the method that you just mentioned, and I just had a customer do this in Australia and then came back to me and said, "Man, were you right?" Because he had a pair of Quattros, and I said, "Look, get that thing out of the system and do it in the Quattro and tell me which one, either way, you're going to end up the same, but tell me which one you like the sound with, because you may have gotten all excited about the improvements in the bass and not noticed that your mids and highs and your imaging went the hell on you." And sure enough, he got back to me about a week later and said, "Richard, you were absolutely right." So there's nothing wrong with it. If that's the only way you have to make bass corrections and your room is really, really bad, it's going to be a net gain for you. But
Yep.
You wouldn't want to do that with a Vandersteen when you have this better way to do it available.
Yep. So why is it that when you use DSP like that, that it does squash the soundstage and that kind of thing down and kind of constrict? It's almost like putting feedback on the system.
It is feedback. Digital is max feedback, okay? And there is a lot of calculations, a lot of extra parts in the signal path. And try as we may, we designers have not found a way to put a boatload of more parts in the signal path and somehow not have them have a sonic signature. We're just not at that point. Parts are parts. And our amplifiers, one reason why they sound as clean and as effortless as they do is there's only 5 parts in the signal path. That's an unusually low number for an amplifier to have. There's a lot of parts in them, but I'm talking about in the signal path. So again, understand a lot of people are impressed with that kind of room control, and it is better than nothing, but it has its consequences. And one of them is things get puny, even though the bass gets big, because you can adjust. Many of them have EQ in them, so you can actually make the bass bigger, but the sound stage gets smaller.
Well, I think, the one thing I learned a long time ago is there are people out there a lot smarter than myself. And so I have always looked to the quality of the guy that designs the speaker. If I do my proper part in the room and with proper electronics, then I'm going to have a very natural sounding system anyway. And if I start messing around with it too much, then I am now the designer and I'm smarter than you. And I'm not a speaker designer.
You also have that situation where some of those start EQing up into the mid-range frequencies where things get directional and everything. And that's like having a very accomplished pianist come to your home because you've got a grand piano in your room like we do here. And I say, you tell this Mr. Horowitz, if he were alive, sir, when you play that beautiful Rachmaninoff piece and you get anywhere near middle C, we've got about a 6 dB hole in our room at that frequency. Would you hit that key a little harder to kind of flatten it out for me? That would sound like somebody on a goofy piano that didn't know what he was doing.
It sounds like me.
In a way, that's what some of these DSP boxes are doing. They're not limiting their correction to only the bass and the signal processing. The consequence of it affects all the mids and highs. So you got to really, us guys, even me, years ago, we were playing with a wire combination and we were bi-wired because we started that 40 years ago. And I'd found a wire that was great in the bass, and there was this cable made by Polk called the Cobra cable that was really good in mids and the highs. It would pass square waves. And sure enough, me being a guy, like all guys are, I put it in my system. And I was just so amazed at how good the bass was, and so amazed how good the mids and trebles were. About 2 weeks later, my wife comes out of the kitchen. She says, honey, how come the system doesn't image like it used to? I didn't even notice it. But she's right. The image had gone to hell. I was just so focused on what I did in the lows and highs. Anyway, it can happen to the best of us.
That's the guy's brain mentality. We can't help it.
Exactly.
All right. So, guys,
that's why I don't evaluate my own work, Alan, because an engineer is going to hear what he thinks he did, and he thinks he's supposed to hear. That's what he's going to hear. You better get somebody else's opinion, or you'll be out in left field somewhere.
Well, that's a very, very, very smart thing to do. Folks, I want to thank you all so much out there for joining us on HiFi Chats number 7. This has been with Richard Vandersteen, president of Vandersteen Audio and temporarily COVID expert, chief economist, and SBA loan expert. So anyway, I want to thank Richard for being on. Thank you so much, Richard. Anyway, this is Alan Jones with HiFi Buys. This has been HiFi Chats number 7 with Richard Vandersteen of Vandersteen Audio. Thanks.
Thank you, Alan, and all the good folks watching.
Thank you.